You know, usually when we talk about a medical diagnosis, there's this expectation of like extreme precision.
Right, like engineering or something.
Yeah, exactly, like engineering. You break your arm, the x-ray shows that jagged white line, and the doctor just points at the illuminated screen and says, well, there it is. That is the problem.
Right. It's binary. I mean, it's either fractured or it's intact.
And that's comforting. I mean, we desperately like things to be visible, to be perfectly categorized, but then you step into the world of neurodevelopment or trauma or just trying to actually rewire your own psychology, and suddenly that x-ray machine is just blowing sparks.
Yeah, completely short-circuiting.
We're looking at a diagnostic landscape that is entirely murky.
It is the absolute definition of diagnostic muddy waters. You can't just point to a pixel on a scan and say, ah, there is your existential dread.
Exactly. And that exact friction, like the massive gulf between what we want to be perfectly clean and organized and what is actually chaotic, messy, and totally irrational, is where we are planting our flag today.
Which is such a fun place to be.
Oh, it's the best. Because today, for you listening, we are moving entirely away from the high-minded, pristine theories of self-improvement, and we are stepping right into the hilarious, often deeply painful reality of actually trying to apply them to daily life. We are taking a fully enlightened Zen master protagonist and throwing them headfirst into the cereal aisle.
Which is, frankly, where the real work actually happens.
Yeah, without a doubt. So welcome to today's deep dive. This is part 2 of our Emojivolution cereal aisle special.
A highly anticipated sequel.
Right. And our mission today is to deliver a complete meta-explicative breakdown of the grocery store meltdown that we hinted at last time. We've got a massive stack of sources for this extended director's cuts of the Emojivolution Chronicles. We've got the advanced mathematics frameworks, deep psychological blueprints on the unseen force.
It's a heavy stack.
It really is.
Yeah.
And we're going to use all of it to decode the specific system glitches that trip you up in daily life.
And we're going to do it by focusing on the underlying mechanics. So not just what happens when we melt down, but the precise, epically comprehensible mathematical and psychological reasons why our brains short-circuit in these perfectly mundane environments.
So to set the stage for you listening right now, let's look at our recurring protagonist. They are referred to in the text as the Traveler. Now, the Traveler has just finished 31 chapters of intense spiritual and psychological work.
They have done the heavy lifting.
Oh, absolutely. They've learned about witness consciousness, they've studied nervous system alignment, they understand the underlying force of reality.
They've effectively completed the scaffolding phase of their transformation. So they're sitting in a perfectly quiet room with their journal, and they feel, completely integrated.
Right. They're existing in this state of perceived total mastery.
Mm-hmm.
But then the brilliant twist in this whole framework is what happens next. The environment shifts. The Traveler is thrown out of the meditation retreat and directly into the emojiverse.
The emojiverse, which the text brilliantly calls the blooper reel of enlightenment.
The blooper reel, yeah. So perfect.
It's the ultimate reality check.
Yeah.
It is the universe essentially running a stress test on your newly compiled code to see if it actually functions outside of a laboratory setting.
And this is why this matters to you. I mean, it is so easy to feel like an absolute Jedi master when you are meditating on a mountaintop or just like listening to an interesting discussion with a nice cup of coffee.
Right. Anyone can be Zen on a mountaintop.
Exactly. But what happens when you are stuck in line at the DMV? You know that physical feeling. The air conditioning is broken. The person in front of you has 17 highly complicated forms to fill out. The fluorescent lights are humming. Your phone is at 4% battery, and you are just staring into the abyss of municipal bureaucracy.
Oh, yeah. In a perfectly controlled environment, everyone is an aster. But if your internal architecture doesn't work at the DMV, or in a traffic jam, or when you spill coffee on your laptop, well, it doesn't work anywhere.
This deep dive is about surviving the friction of a Tuesday afternoon, because the framework here presents modern life as this cosmic debugging nightmare.
It really does.
You wake up, you write this simple hello world intention for your day like, I will be present and kind today, and the universe instantly scrambles it into a complex, chaotic mess. I just love the visual of the pre-exam ritual here.
It's so vivid.
Picture someone sitting at their desk, surrounded by 47 empty coffee cups, browser tabs stacked so high they look like the Willis Tower, a rubber duck wearing tiny glasses for moral support, and one single prayer candle labeled, "Please compile."
Yeah, it captures that pure desperation perfectly.
Yeah.
You are trying to force a system to work when you don't fully understand the underlying code, so you just start throwing caffeine and raw willpower at the problem.
So let's look at how this coding error plays out in the physical world. The scene is set in the text. It is Tuesday, 11:47 a.m.
A very specific time.
Very specific. The traveler walks through the automatic sliding doors of the local grocery store. And their stated goal from the source is to shop from a place of pure awareness.
And right there, before they even grab a shopping cart, we hit our first major system glitch. It's a phenomenon called spiritual inflation.
Okay, let's unpack this. I want to push back on this term a bit. Because when I think of inflation, I think of an ego getting blown up, someone acting arrogant. But the traveler is trying to be purely aware. How is that arrogant?
It's arrogant because it's the ego simply changing its wardrobe.
Changing its wardrobe.
Yeah, so spiritual inflation occurs when the everyday surface personality hijacks spiritual language to covertly feel superior to its environment. The traveler is walking through the produce section thinking, I am not just a shopper like these other mere mortals. I'm a flowing entity of light. I don't need a written shopping list. The universe will intuitively guide me to the exact nutrients my cellular structure requires.
Oh, wow. Okay, so it's a massive superiority complex masked as deep humility.
Precisely. Instead of bragging about a promotion at work, the ego is bragging to itself about its high state of consciousness. It's using spirituality to build an invisible wall between itself and all the normal people who are just there trying to buy a frozen pizza and get home to their kids. It's actually a defense mechanism.
A defense mechanism against what, though?
Against the sheer vulnerability of just being a messy, ordinary human. If you are a flowing entity of light, you don't have to deal with the mundane annoyance of realizing you forgot to buy paper towels. You're above it.
I see this all the time. It reminds me of people you could call like workshop junkies, people who memorize all the psychological buzzwords, they track their mindfulness minutes on an app, they know exactly what their attachment style is, but they have completely left their actual bodies behind.
Yes, the academic students of their own lives.
Right. They are entirely paralyzed when it comes to actually living. But wait, if the entire goal of all this internal work is to become self-aware, why does this specific type of awareness actually cause us to detach from reality?
That is the core paradox, and it brings us right to the very first obstacle in the grocery store, the eggs.
Ah, the egg encounter.
Let's break down the mechanics of what happens here. The traveler's surface self, which we can define as just the everyday, functional, biological human, looks at the refrigerated shelf and thinks, we need eggs. We're out of eggs at home. Let's just grab the carton. It's a simple functional drive. Hunger equals food. But then the witness intervenes.
And the witness is that newly trained, highly analytical observer part of the mind. I can literally hear the internal monologue in the text. The witness steps in, wearing an imaginary lab coat, and says in this very calm, detached, slightly condescending voice, I am noticing a desire for eggs. Who is the one that wants the eggs? Notice the desire. Sit with it.
And how does the biological surface self respond to that?
It gets instantly defensive. It's like, what are you talking about? It's not a profound desire. It's breakfast. I just want to make a stupid omelet. And then the witness pushes back even harder. Interesting. Notice the defensiveness arising. Are we attached to the concept of protein? Are we violently clinging to the rigid societal structure of breakfast?
This specific glitch is diagnosed in the source as over-witnessing. And this directly answers your question about why this type of awareness detaches us. Over-witnessing is a mechanical failure. It occurs when you analyze a natural, biological, or social impulse so intensely and with such severe detachment that you completely sever the natural flow of life.
It's like having an incredibly aggressive antivirus software running in the background of your computer.
Yeah.
You try to open a perfectly safe, basic file like a Word document, or in this case, a carton of eggs, and the antivirus completely freezes the computer to run a deep-level heuristic scan on whether the Word document is a threat to your operating system.
That is a perfect analogy. You are taking a simple, functional, variable hunger and forcing the system to process it as an existential crisis. You are taking 100% of your CPU power and dedicating it to a background diagnostic tool, which means the actual application shopping crashes.
So you aren't actually being aligned or spiritual, you're just being incredibly annoying to your own nervous system.
Exactly. You are weaponizing self-awareness against your own humanity. And as the traveler moves deeper into the store, this background diagnostic tool is about to encounter a data load it cannot possibly handle.
Because they survive the egg debate, but then they round the corner into aisle 7, the abyss, the cereal aisle.
The ultimate stress test of modern decision-making architecture.
The traveler is suddenly confronted with 47 different types of cereal, 23 different brands. It is this towering wall of brightly colored cardboard promising infinite choice, and the internal decision cascade that happens next is just a masterclass in psychological overthinking.
We're watching a system crash under its own weight in real time. Let's trace the logic path here.
First, the surface self looks at the Cheerios. It says, okay, let's just grab the Cheerios. We always get Cheerios because they are heart healthy. Done.
Simple enough.
But the over-witnessing software immediately flags this. Is that true? Or are we choosing Cheerios because we want to signal to the world that we are wellness people? Are we just performing wellness to mask our fear of mortality? What does this specific box say about our identity?
It is taking a box of toasted oats and turning it into a mirror for societal performance.
Right. So the traveler panics, puts the Cheerios down. Then they look down a shelf at the Frosted Flakes. The witness immediately observes, the inner child wants the sugar. It's seeking comfort. Are we repressing our unhealed inner child trauma by not buying the Frosted Flakes?
So now we are actively bringing complex inner child integration work into aisle 7.
It's so absurd but so recognizable. The surface self argues back, I am not repressing trauma. I am a 35-year-old adult. I don't want to eat pure sugar. So the witness says, fine, then buy the Raisin Bran. That is the cereal of the responsible adult. Face your responsibilities.
Yeah, and the surface self just can't take it.
The surface self absolutely rebels. It says, I hate Raisin Bran. It tastes like cardboard. If I buy it, I feel like I'm just performing maturity.
This complete systemic gridlock is what the framework calls the paralysis of significance.
Paralysis of significance. That is such a heavy, accurate phrase. What is the actual neurobiological or structural mechanism breaking down here? Like, why does a choice between 3 boxes of grain paralyze a human being?
It happens when you try to make every single micro decision a massive referendum on your character. The human brain is an absolute marvel, but it has very strict bandwidth limits. Your conscious mind, the analytical part that is currently interrogating the cultural implications of Raisin Bran processes about 40 to 50 bits of information per second. That's it.
Wait, only 40 to 50 bits?
Yeah, it is a very narrow, very intense, highly focused beam of light.
It's a tiny keyhole. It can only look at one thing at a time.
Exactly. But your intuitive physical body system, your nervous system, your gut microbiome, your sensory processing, your peripheral vision, that entire biological network takes in roughly 11 million bits of information per second.
Wow. 11 million!
So when the traveler standing in aisle 7, their 11 million bit intuitive hardware is just sending a very simple, clear signal. Blood sugar is dropping. We are hungry. Grab the oats.
But they are actively suppressing that massive, accurate data feed.
Yes. They are suppressing 11 million bits of physical reality to force a tiny 40-bit conscious processor to analyze a situation that simply does not require conscious analysis. When you overload a 40-bit processor with 11 million bits worth of existential variables, mortality, inner child trauma, societal performance, the internal system literally overheats and freezes.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting, because the advanced mathematics framework gives us the actual structural formula for this glitch. I want to see if I can explain this fraction concept, and you tell me if I'm tracking with the logic.
Go for it. Let's look at the math.
So the framework introduces this mathematical notation, the 1x versus the x1. In this notation, the 1 is the unity operator. It represents me, the conscious agent, the self, the autonomous human. And the x represents the variable, the environment, the context, the weather, or in this case, the 47 boxes of cereal.
That's correct. And what is the absolute unbreakable rule of this specific mathematics framework?
The rule is that the denominator, the bottom part of the fraction, is always the shaping force. It is the governor. The numerator, the top part, is merely the content being shaped. So if I apply this to the traveler in the cereal aisle, when they are completely frozen by the 47 boxes, they are trapped in a 1x state.
Spot on. Let's explore the mechanics of that 1x state. Why is it paralyzing?
Because in the 1x expression, the traveler is stuck in the numerator. They are the passive content. The x, which represents the infinite choices, the societal expectations of wellness, the sugar content, is in the denominator. So the environment is the active governing force. The traveler has completely surrendered their autonomy. They are actively allowing a cardboard box of toasted oats to act as the governor of their identity. They are waiting for the cereal to tell them who they are.
Which is a mathematical impossibility, hence the system crash.
Mhm.
The cereal cannot give you an identity. And because they are stuck in this impossible 1x loop, waiting for an external variable to resolve an internal process, we get a literal temporal anomaly.
The climax of absurdity. 10 whole minutes pass. It's 11:57 a.m. now. The traveler is literally sitting on the linoleum floor of the grocery store. They have arranged 12 different boxes of cereal into a semicircle around them, like a Stonehenge of breakfast carbohydrates. Their eyes are closed, and they are doing deep diaphragmatic breathing exercises to connect with the vibration of the grain and transcend the illusion of choice.
It is brilliant comedy, but it highlights how deeply the 40-bit processor will hallucinate when it's trapped in an unsolvable loop. It starts inventing spiritual rituals just to buy time.
And then reality collides with the hallucination. A very tired store employee wearing a blue vest cautiously approaches this person meditating in a cereal crop circle and says, "Sir, you're blocking the aisle. People need to get by." And the traveler, without even opening their eyes, slowly responds, "The aisle is a metaphor for the path."
It's hilarious, but I think we need to connect this directly to the listener's life. Because while you listening to this might not build a serial Stonehenge, how often do you experience this exact paralysis of significance?
Oh, constantly. Think about drafting a simple 2-line email to a colleague or a boss. It should take 30 seconds. But you sit there for 20 minutes typing and deleting the word best versus sincerely versus thanks.
Right, agonizing over it.
You freeze because you've overloaded a mundane communication with existential weight. You've made a sign-off, a referendum on your professional competence and your likability.
Or think about online shopping. You need a new blender. You could just buy the one that costs $40 and has spinning blades.
Right.
But instead, you spend 3 hours reading 400 conflicting reviews, cross-referencing motor wattage, agonizing over whether a plastic pitcher makes you complicit in environmental degradation.
Yes. You have put yourself in the 1x state. You are letting the blender or the email act as the denominator. You are letting the environment govern your autonomy, and you are trapped in a temporal anomaly of your own making.
But as we see in the grocery store, that bubble cannot last forever. The external world eventually demands a resolution.
Which brings us to the inevitable consequence of the employee's intervention. The employee basically says, "I don't know about the path, man, but I'm getting my manager." And instantly, the spell is broken. The spiritual inflation bubble completely shatters.
And the immediate physiological emotion that floods the traveler's system is profound. Burning shame. The realization of, I am a grown adult sitting on the floor of a supermarket.
But the absolute cruelty of the human mind is that the over-witnessing software doesn't just turn off when you realize you're being ridiculous.
No, it just shifts its analytical focus.
Mm-hmm.
The witness, which a minute ago was analyzing the inner child's desire for Frosted Flakes, now turns its cold, detached gaze directly onto the traveler's humiliation. It cruelly narrates the internal experience in real time.
It's brutal.
It says, notice the shame. Notice the intense heat rising in the cheeks. Notice the sudden spike in heart rate. Notice the intense desire to crawl under the shelving unit and dissolve into dust.
It's like having a clinical sports commentator narrating your worst, most vulnerable moments inside your own head. So the traveler is unable to handle the sheer volume of this shame. The 40-bit processor is completely overwhelmed, so they panic. They execute an erratic emergency overcorrection. They decide that the only way to save face internally is radical non-attachment.
Which is, of course, a complete and utter misunderstanding of what non-attachment actually means.
Totally. The surface self frantically thinks, if I am truly an enlightened being, I shouldn't care what cereal I buy. I must transcend preference entirely. Preference is ego. And what happens next is just glorious. The cart of chaos.
The traveler just starts clearing the shelves like an absolute maniac. They're just throwing boxes into the cart with wild abandon.
Cheerios, Cocoa Puffs, Special K, Fruit Loops, Great Nuts, they don't even look. 47 boxes of cereal go into the cart. But here's the kicker. They have 0 milk. They have 0 eggs. They have completely abandoned their original functional biological requirement for breakfast solely to prove a spiritual point to themselves.
They have sacrificed their actual needs to protect their self-image as someone who doesn't have needs.
And they march this towering cart of chaos right to the checkout desk, where physical reality hits them over the head with a cash register. The bill is $347.82 for cereal.
Incredible.
The traveler tries to maintain this detached, floating persona. They take deep breaths. They tell themselves the witness has no attachment to capital. Money is just energy flowing through the grid. They swipe their debit card.
Deep? Peace and deny.
They blink. They swipe again.
Yeah.
PN denied. They have completely blanked on a 4-digit number they have typed into keypads for 10 years. Why? What is the actual mechanism of this ultimate glitch?
It is the natural endpoint of overwitnessing. The framework diagnoses this as severe disembodiment. The exact quote is devastating. Why couldn't you remember the PN? Because you were too busy witnessing the texture of the plastic keypad and analyzing your attachment to the concept of currency instead of just remembering the 4 digits.
I want to dig into this concept of disembodiment because it is so relevant. The text makes a massive claim here. It states that modern life is essentially a highly funded training camp for abandoning the body.
It's a profound observation. Think about how we operate daily. From the moment we wake up and look at a screen, we are conditioned to trust our mental processing, the user interface, the UI over our actual physical hardware. We live entirely in our thoughts about life, rather than participating in the tactile sensation of life itself.
The traveler intellectualized the grocery store so intensely that they literally disconnected their consciousness from their physical nervous system. They became a brain in a jar. They were floating 3 feet above the situation, analyzing it, categorizing it, spiritualizing it, but they weren't actually in the store. They weren't in their body.
And memory, especially procedural memory, like a PIN number, is heavily tied to physical state and embodiment. Because they had evacuated their body to live in the UI of their mind, the basic functional memory stored in the hardware was completely inaccessible. The 40-bit processor was maxed out on witnessing the texture, so it couldn't retrieve the data.
The aftermath is just total defeat. The line of people behind them is glaring. The cashier refuses to hold 47 boxes of cereal. The traveler has to abandon the cart, walk out through the automatic doors, and drive home. 2 hours wasted. 0 groceries. Hundreds of dollars of theoretical debt.
But the framework does offer a tiny, vital sliver of redemption in the aftermath.
Right. The traveler gets home utterly defeated. They order a pepperoni pizza, but they eat that pizza differently than they would have before their 31 chapters of spiritual work. They eat it in witness mode, but a softer version. They notice the grease on the cheese. They notice the physical act of chewing. They notice the deep, heavy sensation of self-loathing in their chest. And then they just look up at the ceiling and whisper, "I just wanted Cheerios."
It's a beautiful, pathetic moment because it highlights the actual truth of this kind of internal work. The practice doesn't prevent the mess. Being mindful doesn't stop you from making a fool of yourself or getting overwhelmed by choices or forgetting your PIN. It just helps you observe the mess with a little less judgment eventually. It allows you to eat the pizza of your own defeat and actually taste it, rather than just completely numbing out.
But the tragic irony of the human nervous system is that it doesn't just process that humiliation and let it go, it bottles it. The 40-bit processor might move on to watching Netflix, but the 11 million-bit physical system has stored all that cortisol and shame. Which brings us to what happens when the lights go out. If the cereal aisle was the system crash, 3.0M is the reboot loop.
The witching hour, the classic hour of existential reckoning.
The traveler is wide awake. The clock on the nightstand reads 2.47 a.m. The silence in the room is deafening. And this is when the framework introduces the concept of a samskara attack.
Samskaras is an old Sanskrit term, but the modern application here is brilliant. A samskara is a deep mental groove. It's an emotional blueprint or a neural pathway that you've constructed over a lifetime of repeated reactions. They are the background programs, the songs your brain automatically plays on repeat when your conscious guard is down.
And why do they attack specifically at 3 a.m.?
It's biological. At around 3 a.m., your body naturally starts to release a small pulse of cortisol to prepare you to wake up a few hours later. But if your 11 million-bit system is already flooded with unresolved shame and stress from, say, abandoning 47 boxes of cereal, that natural cortisol pulse hits an already sensitized system. Your brain wakes up, detects the stress chemicals, and says, "Alert, we are in danger." Why are we in danger? Let me search the archives for an explanation.
And it opens the playlist spiral. The traveler is lying there, and the mind just starts looping the highlight reel of every awkward, misaligned moment of their life to justify the physical feeling of dread. It's replaying the time they waved back at someone in a coffee shop who was actually waving at the person behind them. It's replaying the hedgehog incident from 2014. It's replaying a minor corporate fumble.
The brain is matching the frequency of the physical shame with historical data.
Desperate to change this internal vibration, the traveler reaches for their phone. They want to escape the loop. They open Spotify. But the algorithm is basically a digital mirror of their samskaras. It cracks their data. It knows exactly what they listen to when they are stressed. They hit shuffle, and the algorithm plays Mr. Brightside by The Killers.
The ultimate algorithmic anthem of cyclical angst and rumination.
And the traveler just absolutely violently rejects it. They sit up in bed. No, I am not this person anymore. I am a conscious being. I refuse to spiral. I need to shock the system. They attempt what we call a brute force override.
Which, structurally speaking, is always a critical error.
They decide they are going to physically disrupt the neural pathways with sheer volume and aggression. They scroll past the meditation tracks, they scroll past the ambient focus playlists, and they put on Slayer's Raining Blood at maximum volume through their Bluetooth speaker at 3.24 in the morning.
Let's look at the exact psychological conflict happening here. This is the conflict of environment versus alignment. You have an internal battery issue, the emotional spiral, the cortisol, the active samskara, and you are trying to fix it by frantically plugging into an external grid. You're using the external environment, the aggressive music, the sheer decibels, to force an internal shift.
And the environment pushes back immediately. Bang, bang, bang on the shared apartment wall. It's neighbor Janet. She yells through the drywall, turn it down. It's 3:30 in the morning. I have work. And the traveler, completely out of their mind with spiritual desperation and sleep deprivation, yells back at the wall, metamorphosis is loud, Janet.
It is the perfect, absurd encapsulation of why this brute force method never works. The underlying framework states explicitly that you cannot force an internal shift using external aggression. It just creates more resistance. The traveler is trying to blast away their own uncomfortable humanity.
Okay, I have to push back on this because I think a lot of people listening will disagree. We all do this. We constantly try to life hack our way out of a bad mood. If I'm feeling lethargic or anxious, I might take a freezing 3-minute cold plunge. Or I'll go to the gym and blast aggressive rap music to change my state, or drink a double espresso. And it works. It changes how I feel. Why is this framework so fundamentally against using brute force to change our state?
It's a crucial distinction. The framework is not against the actions themselves. Music, cold plunges, caffeine, these are completely neutral tools. The framework is critiquing the directional flow of the action. This brings us back to the metamatics, specifically a concept called dashboard logging, and the difference between operating as a reactive variable versus an autonomous variable.
Okay, I want to make sure I really understand this. Break down the difference. What is R1V versus V1?
Let's go back to our fractions. If you let the external world set your internal temperature, if you rely on the Spotify algorithm, or the shock of the cold water, or even neighbor Janet's anger to dictate how you feel or act, you are operating as a reactive variable. You are trapped in that 1x state again. The framework calls this R1V.
So I am the one, and I am reacting to the X denominator.
Yes. You are starting your day, or managing your 3 a.m. crisis, in pure reaction mode. You are frantically clicking icons on a desktop screen, hoping to change how the computer works, without understanding or addressing the actual underlying code.
If I blast Slayer to drown out my anxious thoughts, I haven't actually addressed the anxiety. I've just deafened myself to it. I'm trying to patch the software instead of rewriting the code.
Exactly. The upgrade, the actual structural shift, is moving to V1, the position of 1. You become the autonomous variable. You invert the equation to X1. You become the constant, the active shaping force in the numerator, and the environment, including your own anxious thoughts or the loud music, becomes the variable in the denominator that you filter and govern. If you take a cold plunge from a V1 state, you are consciously choosing to subject your body to stress to build resilience. If you take it from an R1V state, you are desperately running away from your feelings and hoping the ice water numbs them.
That is a massive difference in orientation. So if we can't life hack our way out with ice baths, and we can't outthink the problem in the cereal aisle, what actually happens to the human system when it is under this much unresolved looping stress?
The system does what any overloaded system does. It fragments. Which brings us to the next phase, the fragmentation of the self.
To really illustrate the catastrophic consequences of this unresolved 3 a.m. spiral, the timeline jumps forward slightly to a scene of a work meeting on Zoom. The traveler is absolutely exhausted. They have a massive cortisol hangover from the grocery store meltdown, followed by the Slayer incident, followed by zero sleep. They are running on complete fumes.
The 40-bit processor is basically melting.
Right. And during this highly visible Zoom call, they try to sound smart and present, they try to contribute, and they accidentally use a completely made-up word. They are trying to describe a project schedule, and they say the word timeline-esque.
Timeline-esque. A perfectly mundane, slightly awkward corporate fumble. In a normal state, you just correct yourself and move on.
But for the traveler in their highly sensitized, sleep-deprived R1V state, it is an existential catastrophe. It is the final straw. And the framework meticulously details how the internal operating system completely fragments in real time. It literally splits into 4 distinct parts, each operating entirely independently of the others.
This is a masterclass in psychological observation, the 4-part fragmentation. Let's walk through exactly what the system does when it shatters.
Let's do it. First, we have the mind. The mind immediately begins a hyperspeed spiral about legacy and reputation. It's projecting years into the future. It's thinking. Everyone on this grid saw that. The CEO noticed, I am fundamentally unpromotable. My tombstone will literally say, here lies the person who confidently said, timeline-esque. I have ruined my life. The mind projects a tiny linguistic error into eternal ruin.
Meanwhile, let's look at the body. What is the physical hardware doing? It goes into a pure biological freeze response. The vagus nerve essentially slams the brakes. The body is completely immobilized by the mind's perceived threat. It forgets how lips work. It forgets to blink. The lungs just stop pulling in oxygen. The traveler is just staring at the green camera light, mouth slightly open, frozen in a micro-expression of pure panic.
Then we have the force. The subtle energy body. And what does it do? It just abandons ship entirely. It assesses the gridlock between the mind and the body, says, nope, absolutely not dealing with this trauma, and it floats away. It completely dissociates from the present moment to think about a sandwich. Not just any sandwich. It is intensely visualizing a turkey sandwich with a very specific, grainy deli mustard. It has completely unplugged from the Zoom call.
And finally, we have the witness. The part of the mind that the traveler spent 31 chapters, hours of meditation, and thousands of dollars on retreats to cultivate. The highest self.
And what does the witness do to help in this crisis? Absolutely nothing. It is just sitting back eating popcorn, watching this entire disaster unfold. It's narrating, wow, look at this complete systemic fragmentation. The heart rate is at a 120 BPM. The energy body is hallucinating mustard. Look at the sheer panic in the eyes. How fascinating. Notice the destruction.
The witness offers zero tactical support. It just takes copious notes on your demise.
Why? If the whole point of this work is to build the witness, why doesn't it step in and say, hey, it's just a word, take a breath, you're fine?
Because intervention is not its job. The witness is an observer, not a manager. And this brings us to the crucial lesson of the entire emojiverse framework. The reason the framework argues so forcefully that these failures, the grocery store meltdown, the 3 a.m. Slayer spiral, the Zoom call fragmentation, are not regressions. They are necessary structural updates.
I need you to explain why failing this spectacularly is necessary.
Because you cannot bypass your humanity to get to your divinity. The traveler thought enlightenment meant leaving the messy, awkward, forgetful, emotional human behind. They thought they could ascend past it. But the framework insists that you have to take the messy part of you, the biological reality that forgets Pinay numbers, the part that yells at neighbor Janet, the part that panics over saying timeline-esque. You have to take all of that along for the ride. You cannot amputate your humanity and call it healing.
So the goal isn't to become this perfectly smooth, glitch-free, unbothered spiritual robot?
Absolutely not. The goal is to be the person who glitches, notices the glitch, and crucially doesn't spiral into a second layer of self-hatred because of the glitch. The witness isn't there to scold you for wanting Frosted Flakes or for getting embarrassed on Zoom. It's there to add space between the event and your reaction. It's there to say, look, the human is embarrassed, the human wants sugar. How beautifully absurd. It's about developing a profound, indestructible sense of humor about your own existence.
Which perfectly bridges us to the ultimate resolution of all this chaos. So what does this all mean for us? If we're going to glitch, how do we actually navigate the embarrassment of it?
The framework gives us the ultimate antidote to the heavy, crushing gravity of self-improvement and spiritual work. The levity of the emojiverse.
Levity, just lightening up.
Yes. The final boss of your internal development isn't facing down some ultimate cosmic darkness or conquering existential fear. The final boss is your daily reality. It's spending 45 minutes on the internet passionately arguing with a stranger about whether a hot dog qualifies as a sandwich. It's successfully navigating the DMV without losing your mind. It's standing in aisle 7. If you cannot laugh at your own desperate attempt to be holy while simultaneously yelling at your neighbor through the drywall, you aren't enlightened. You are just rigid. And rigidity always breaks under pressure.
This brings us to a vital tool from the text, which is called Pillar 4, nounships. This is the actual grammatical key to dissolving that rigidity.
Nounships is a fascinating linguistic and psychological tool. The framework explains that the traveler got trapped in the cereal aisle and trapped on the Zoom call because they locked their identity into a concrete noun. They told themselves, I am an enlightened being. And when an enlightened being is physically incapable of picking a box of cereal, the entire identity shatters. The noun fails.
We do this all the time to ourselves. We say, I am an anxious person. I am a failure. I am a bad communicator. I'm an introvert. We treat these labels like concrete poured directly into our DNA. We make them permanent nouns.
A nounship is the active, conscious recognition that these labels are not permanent nouns. They are temporary states. They're relationships you are currently holding with an emotion. You aren't permanently anxious or a failure. You are currently experiencing anxiety mode. You are temporarily occupying a failure state.
It changes the entire grammar of how you relate to yourself. If I say I'm anxious, I am trapped in the 1x state. The anxiety is the denominator governing me. But if I say my nervous system is currently in anxiety mode, I am in the x1 state. I am the autonomous one, observing a temporary variable.
Exactly. If the traveler had realized they weren't an enlightened being failing at grocery shopping, but simply a human currently occupying serial decision mode, the existential meltdown never would have happened. The 40-bit processor wouldn't have crashed. They would have just laughed at their indecision, grabbed the Cheerios, and moved on. The massive friction comes from the permanent label.
No, speaking of how our environment and algorithms actively try to force us into these permanent labels, I need to drop a quick disclaimer here. The source material touches heavily on how digital platforms manipulate these emotional states, specifically mentioning how algorithms serve us rage bait or how historical delusions of supremacy are weaponized to keep us reactive. Just as a reminder for you listening, we aren't taking sides on any specific cultural or political issues mentioned in the source. We are entirely focused on unpacking the mechanics of how the framework says these systems operate on our psychology and our nervous systems.
And mechanically speaking, the goal of those systems is clear. Whether it's a social media algorithm serving you highly curated rage bait, or your own internal samskara serving you an embarrassing memory at 3 a.m., the objective is to pull you out of the V1 autonomous state and trap you in the R1V reactive state. They want you reacting blindly to permanent labels, rather than flowing fluidly through temporary states, because a reactive system is predictable, and an autonomous system is not.
So connecting this all directly back to you, the listener, think about your own internal architecture right now. How many nounships are you currently treating as permanent, poured concrete in your own life? What heavy labels have you glued to your own forehead? I am the responsible one who holds it all together. I am the chaotic one who always messes up. I am just bad at technology. And how often are you over-witnessing your own completely natural impulses, analyzing your own hunger until you literally starve yourself of joy?
If you find yourself caught in that 1x loop, staring at the 47 boxes of cereal in your own life, the framework offers a very simple, immediate first step. Laugh at it. Recognize the absolute absurdity of the blooper reel.
Because the blooper reel isn't a mistake, it is the feature film.
Exactly. The glitches are the path.
We have covered an immense, chaotic journey today. We started at 11:47 a.m. in aisle 7, exploring the temporal anomaly of the paralysis of significance. We watched the 1x equation play out in real time as 47 boxes of cereal piled up in the cart of chaos. We witnessed the ultimate glitch of disembodiment when the PN was denied at the register. We survived the 3 a.m. playlist spiral, the cortisol spike, and the brute force Slayer intervention. We mapped the 4-part fragmentation of the Zoom call where the energy body hallucinates dilly mustard. And finally, we arrived at the realization that levity and understanding our temporary nounships is the only real antidote to spiritual rigidity.
It is a profound paradigm-shifting move from trying to perfectly control your reality to actively, humorously, and authentically participating in it.
But, as always on these deep dives, the source material leaves us with a hook, a loose thread to pull on that challenges everything we just built. And I want to leave you with this final, incredibly provocative thought to mull over.
It's a question straight from the deepest, most complex part of the text regarding that 3 a.m. spiral.
Right. The entire framework asks us to identify with the witness, the observer, the part of us that just takes notes and watches the system fragment. But think about the traveler at 3:24 a.m., sitting up in bed, rejecting the Spotify algorithm. If the witness is purely watching, and the surface self is just a biological entity panicking on cortisol, who is the one that actually decides to reach for the phone? Who is the one that actively decides to press play on the heavy metal music to override the system?
If the surface self is reacting and the witness is observing, who is taking action?
Who is the actual driver of your system when the surface self and the witness are separated? What is that unseen animating force that actually makes the choice?
It's a question that shatters the mirror all over again and forces you to look even deeper into the code.
I highly encourage you to ponder that mystery on your own. Maybe the next time you are standing paralyzed in cereal aisle or staring at a blank email draft. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the messy reality of the emojiverse. Remember, metamorphosis is loud, so don't be afraid to make a little noise. We will catch you on the next one.